Welcome to Doing Good by Doing Better, the podcast for world shapers, not spectators. I'm Margaret Rogers, CEO of Pariveda, a professional services firm that helps make potential possible for our clients. On this show, I talk with founders, executives, and innovators who share hard lessons, bold ideas, and real strategies for purpose-driven growth. This episode will offer practical insights you can use this week to solve forward. Because at Pariveda, we know that doing good only endures when we keep learning how to do better. Today, I'm with Susan Kennedy, a leader at the intersection of water, energy, and public trust. Susan has served California at the highest levels of government, including Cabinet Secretary to Governor Gray Davis and Chief of Staff to Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. And today, she leads work in water infrastructure at Cadiz. In this conversation, we look at how her mantra of being honest, do your best, don't be greedy, became her leadership operating system. We unpack her choice to partner with Native American tribes to advance water equity. She also hears about the personal $1 million risk she took to save her company. Let's jump in. First of all, I'm excited about somebody who's talking about work as a mission, not a job. You don't hear that all the time in that way. So really appreciate you joining us in our podcast to share leadership and seeing leadership in action. So thanks for joining us today.
This is such a great topic because I don't get to talk about how work and life are really part of the same thing, right? So I don't get to talk about it very much.
Well, I'm glad that we can give you a channel for this. So what is something that is exciting and energizing you right now in your work at Cadiz?
I think the most exciting thing for me is the work we're doing with the Native American tribes. When we realize that the perfect partner for us is the Native American tribes on water, it opened up this unbelievable opportunity to make a historic difference in people's lives and, sovereignty, self-determination, justice. And if you do any kind of research in terms of our history with the way we've treated Native American tribes in this country, you can't help but sort of feel like, God, if there was something I could do to actually right a little bit of the wrong and make life dramatically better for even a small part of the population, it just makes you want to get up every day and be grateful for the opportunity. So I'm really excited about what we're doing with Native American tribes.
I would love to hear about your journey. I mean, you have such a wide and rich experience in leadership in different sectors, from government to energy, and now, of course, with Cadiz in the private sector. So talk a little bit about your background and how you ended up where you are today.
I got lucky. I really don't know how I ended up as lucky as I am, but I've never had a job where I wasn't totally driven by either the mission or the person I was working for. I believe in what I'm doing. And other than the restaurant jobs and the cleaning toilet jobs that I had when I was a teenager, which I think everybody needs to do for some character building, I've had the experience of just loving what I do and believing in what I do. So I ended up following my big brother around the country. So he's 7 years older than I am. And I grew up on the East Coast, and he came out to California, and I followed him out here when I turned 20 years old. I had 3 tries to get across the country, 2 failed missions, limping back home. And then on my 3rd trek, I made it out to California. On my 20th birthday, I came across the state line, and I camped on my brother's couch for a while and then got my own apartment. And I immediately got into politics down in Southern California. I think my birth into politics actually started in Pennsylvania. I lived near the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant. And so when they had the accident, the shutdown, and the battles over dumping the radioactive water into the Susquehanna River, that was my first political experience. And so when I went out to California, I got involved with some of the local group. It was actually Tom Hayden and Jane Fonda's organization, Campaign for Economic Democracy. So when I went there, I started volunteering at this organization, and the skills that I learned in terms of being a field organizer, a political organizer, the real hardcore skills going out and community organizing, those were the skills that launched my political career for the rest of my life. And I put those skills to work for different organizations, different causes that I believed in, and it just catapulted me. I had the skill set to be involved at some of the biggest politics in the country on these different issues. And so it finally led me to working for the leadership in California. So I ended up in the governor's office, pretty young, but I ended up as the cabinet secretary to Governor Gray Davis. 1998 was the election, so it was 1999. And I spent 4 years in the Davis administration, and then another 3 years on the Public Utilities Commission. Then Schwarzenegger called me back up to Sacramento. And so I spent these years in state government. The two issues that were just inescapable were energy and water. They were the most challenging issues throughout the administrations that I worked for, because they're trillion-dollar industries based upon critical infrastructure. It takes hundreds of billions of dollars and decades, generational investments in critical infrastructure for clean water and power. And we've taken it for granted for so many generations. The same year that I crossed California and moved here, like 1980, the climate had started changing very dramatically. And so today, clean energy and clean water are some of the greatest climate challenges the world is going to face. And I found myself with the skill set and in position to make a difference on those. So that's how I ended up here.
And it leads me to wonder, how has your leadership style evolved from government? And I think you worked in startups too, right? And now, of course, landing in the water infrastructure company. How has your leadership style evolved?
I think there were two major transition points in terms of my leadership style. And there's nothing more impactful than just time and miles on the odometer, experience. When I was younger, I was very rash, and I had to learn to be a leader. Let me put it that way, right? And I learned the hard way. But there were two really impactful moments in my life in terms of my leadership style. The first was getting sober. And I was in Washington, D.C., working for our senior senator, California Senator Dianne Feinstein. I had worked on her campaign, so I had a real, campaign background, and it was just thrilling being in Washington, D.C., right there, the seat of power. It was great. But I was struggling. Alcoholism ran in my family, and I was a very high-functioning alcoholic, but I still was an alcoholic. And I was very high-pressure jobs, right? So I was extremely high-pressure jobs. But I remember standing on the street corner with a friend of mine, 1995. Yeah, it'll be 30 years this year. I'll be sober. And I said, I can't do this alone. I hit that first step. I was like, I can't do this alone. And so I went through that humbling experience of realizing that alcohol is more powerful than I am. And the friend I was talking to ended up being my sponsor, and she walked me through the initial stages. And the thing that you learn, the first thing that they teach you in the program of getting sober is a concept called rigorous honesty. And it's because addicts, they tend to have little white lies that make excuses for why they were late to work or why they did this or why they reacted that way. And those little white lies become kind of how you live your life, right? So the first thing they do is strip that away. And rigorous honesty was something that had to be taught. Everything I said had to be authentic. No little white lies. When that became applied to politics, it was the reason that I was able to be a leader and do the hard things, tell people the truth, speak truth to power, speak honestly to people who work for you, right? Without letting the emotion and the hysteria and the filters that we create that are distorted. It created a leadership style that kind of came from a quiet honesty. And it was hard. It was very, very hard. It's very hard to be honest with somebody if you're telling them something they don't want to hear, or if you're firing somebody, or you're telling them they're not doing a good job. Or more importantly, I have to admit if I've done something wrong or I've contributed to this. This concept made me a better, people trusted me and they believed in me because I was a straight shooter. I was authentic. And that became the single most important thing in my leadership style.
Yeah. You are known to say, as a mantra almost, be honest, do your best, don't be greedy. I love those three statements. Be honest, do your best, don't be greedy.
That actually came to me one morning. I used to go running in the mornings in San Francisco before the sun came up, and there's nothing like running along the water. I was on my way back when the sun was coming up across the bay, and it was just the best time of the day to be running. And I was facing challenges. I had my own company, and I was struggling. And it was my first time. I was the founding CEO of a startup. And these words, this guy's voice just came in my head, and it was, do your best, be honest, don't be greedy. And I was running it. So there was a cadence to the words, and I couldn't get them out of my head. And that became a mantra. I don't know where it came from. But, in sobriety, I get to listen to the voice that you hear, that everybody has a voice in the back of their head. And, if you're not quiet enough and you can't hear, if you recognize that voice, and that was the voice. Every single time I faced a challenge in a leadership position where, do I do this or do I do that? This would pop into my head, and I would instantly know that the answer is, don't be greedy or be honest. And it has guided me through everything. Never, ever guided me wrong.
And how does that show up now when you're negotiating big infrastructure deals and the work that you do at Cadiz?
I've been through several companies, and it's very high risk, things fall apart. And in my experience in business, every deal falls apart 3 times before it comes together. So, you wait for it, but you don't freak out, it's going to fail, and you just have to keep your eye on it and pull it back up. And there were times when the failure of the company was at stake, and I had to make a decision. Do I be honest with my investors about what just happened, or what I think just happened, or what could happen? Or do I cover it up and keep it going and act as if and do all the big tech things you do to keep it? And I had to decide what was more important, trying to succeed in this moment to make money off this, or be honest because I'm dealing with somebody else's money. And so a lot of times you make the wrong decision, because in tech, you're supposed to go for broke and act bigger than you are and everything. And if it fails, it fails. You just go on to the next thing, right? Keeping the integrity of never forget that it's other people's money. And I owed the honesty to my investors, and that even if it caused a short-term failure or a short-term problem, it would come out better at the end. And it sort of allows me to go 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, and still leap to the next level because I kept that honesty. You know what I mean? There's nothing more than trust. Mm-hmm. People will follow you if they trust you, whether it's an investor, whether it's employees, whether it's the media or politicians or, people you're trying to influence. Mm-hmm. All about trust. And people intuitively, instinctively know when something's wrong. They can't figure out what it is, but there's something not right. But they can intuitively sense if you're telling the truth. And so maintaining that sense of authenticity is a super, super important part of building a leadership style that allows you to go through adversity. And people will follow you. People will trust you, trust the decisions you make, right?
Yeah, you are who you say you are. Even when the decisions don't make them happy, they trust you to make them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that, just based on what you're seeing in business these days, do you think there is a leadership trust crisis?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I came from old school politics where your word is your bond, right? A handshake deal. And today it's almost a caricature of itself in terms of we can't even agree on what the truth is. But 2 decades ago, when I was in state government, I remember dealing with the Democrats and the Republicans and trying to negotiate some really tough stuff. And there was like an alternative truth happening. And I was privy to the thought process behind it. Some of the Democrats were being faced with pressure from NGOs, constituent groups, environmental groups, or whatever. And they were being pressured saying, you have the power with a majority vote bill. You don't need Republican votes to go fix something and get something that you didn't get through negotiations last year, right? And it was basically go further because the ends justifies the means. If you have the power to do something to advance a policy objective, you do it. That undid a lot of handshake deals from the year before. And the little white lies or the political lies that we say out loud to justify the fact that I went back on my word, or I went back on a deal that was negotiated with the other side because they were pressured to do it. But they can't say that. They have to say, well, this is the policy reason. And so this ends justifies the means becomes an alternative truth. And so the public doesn't know who to believe anymore because politics has just become a very ends justifies the means, and you say anything in order to whip up opposition to the other side, demonize the other side. It's very different today. Painfully different.
I read this book, and it's a great book called Factfulness, and it talks about how even data can be spun. Any story can be spun, even though you think numbers are black and white, they're not.
Oh my God. I mean, we're a really big case in point, right? I've spent my career, being honest, don't be greedy, right? And honesty is a really, really important part of who I am because of sobriety, right? I've sat across the table from people today who they don't want a project like ours getting built because they have policy differences. They don't want water supply to fuel housing because they want people to move out of the environmentally sensitive areas and move into dense urban housing. They have a policy disagreement. But in order to stop water supply from fueling housing, they basically make up stories that you're going to kill the environment, you're going to harm the environment. Well, look at the data. No, we're not. I wouldn't do that. I've spent my career working for social justice and the environment. Well, I wouldn't do that. And I'm literally across the table from people who are using an alternative set of facts that have no basis in reality and putting me in the category of, hey, you're a private company. Therefore, nothing you say is truthful. Literally have called me a liar because they have a different set of data points to prove their point. And I just had this experience the other day. It's like, I'm a private sector company, therefore I must be lying.
Yeah. And you're only concerned about making money.
Only concerned about making money.
Yeah.
And coming out from that, trying to get out from that is really challenging. And I have to sort of give up that I'm not going to convince folks. And that's very disheartening. So
yeah.
Live with the fact that this is the way I'm going to be viewed and do it anyway. Get up and do what I have to do.
At times, though, I would imagine that your experience in politics, like still creating some of those bridges, you've had to learn how to build those coalitions anyway, right? Even through some of the noise that you are having to deal with, there are moments where you have to choose to walk away. How do you deal with that?
It's funny how it comes full circle, but this whole rebranding thing we did with Sustaina was how we did it. I had to tell a different story about who we are. And I had to put that story into words and images and actions that translated authentically to the audience that I was talking to, right? So I had to get out from under this image that had been placed on us. You're bad guy, corporate guys, you're destroying the environment for profit. And I had to have a whole different story to tell without words. And what was so powerful about what Sustaina did was they found that kernel of truth about who we are as people. We're not just a corporation that files things with the SEC. We're people, right? And our mission with this company could be told in that story of it's about water for people. And it created a narrative that allowed me to get up every day and do what we're doing and walk the talk. And the talk is what Sustaina created. I don't think we could be here today if that wasn't done so successfully, because it allowed us to tell a different story about who we are and get through that.
And for our listeners, Sustaina is our branding agency that recently rebranded Cadiz. We loved working with y'all on that particular rebrand. It was such a powerful thing, and the movement and momentum it helped with your story was just really a privilege to be a part of. So we were super excited about the success of that. In terms of, connecting yourself to the job, it's never just a job, it's a mission. Can you share a moment when your mission was tested and what helped you stay the course?
The mission was tested. Yeah, well, I made the decision that we were going to partner with Native American tribes. We had been approached by a very large tribe and very wealthy tribe, East Coast, and that kicked the door open. But I was kind of green when it came to working in Indian country. And I spent 8 months, working through this until I finally figured out that working in Indian country means you could spend years grinding away and they never say yes. And I have a limited amount of time. I'm a public company. I have to, show results. I have to have progress. And I believed what I was hearing, that we were going to get a decision. It was going to be really fast. Big tribe's going to come in. We got 8 months into it. And I'm like, I have to go raise equity again. I'm getting close to this. And we got up to the CFO of the tribe and they were like, no, we're going to pass. I was so far out on a limb that this is going to be the first tribal-owned project in U.S. history. And the tribe that walked me down this path just told me, no, we're not going to do it. And I had to make a really fast decision. Do I pivot and go back to the big water agencies that have the money to spend on this thing, go sell water to the highest bidder, right? Or do I stay on this path and go do the work to find the tribes that maybe don't have a lot of money, but they need water? And we went that path. And I had to go out and raise money. I had raised equity again just for working capital to keep it going for another year, because I took us out on a limb. It fell apart and I had a choice. Do I back away from the Native American and go back into the safe place where the same water agencies that own the water and basically don't serve poor communities today because they have money? Or do I find a way to hold out and go figure out how to serve these communities that don't have the money and don't have access to water? And I risked the future of the company on it. It worked out okay. It was don't be greedy, right? Don't go where the money is, go where the people need water. And it will work out okay. And it worked out. But it was pretty freaking scary.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned in terms of giving Native American tribes a piece of that business, right? A stake, it became a mutual win-win. Is that right?
Yeah. And we ended up forming coalitions with these poor communities that don't have access to, they don't have the tax base. They don't have the wealthy ratepayers that can pay for the infrastructure like the city of Los Angeles or, city of San Francisco. Those are big, hefty ratepayers that can pay for big infrastructure projects because they live in wealthy houses and they have the tax base. You live out in a rural area or you live in a Native American tribe and you don't have access to that. Your people are pretty poor. You're dependent on grant funding. I had to put a coalition together of all these poor farm worker and tribal communities out in rural areas in Southern California and say, I'll put up the capital, I'll go get the grants for you, but we'll put a coalition together and you'll get the water for free. You'll get the water for the cost of moving it. And I did it. And it's life-changing for some of these communities. But I'll tell you, some of my own investors looked at me like, are you nuts? You're like giving a water away for free? And I was like, if we're a private sector company trying to sell water to the highest bidder, we'll never get built. Mm-hmm. Right? It has to be, water is life. We can't tell a story that we're the good guys and then be the bad guys in terms of, selling water to the highest bidder. Everybody wins when they're going to bring grant funding together to pay for the infrastructure, right? Private companies aren't eligible for grant funding. These communities are. So spending the capital, the political capital to actually make it real for them, make them owners of it. That's how we got to be a really big project. That's how $1 billion project, because we made sure that the communities where our pipelines pass through those communities, they all have a piece of our success. They own a piece of it. And that made it work.
In our meeting before, I remember one of the stories you talked about was the repurposing of fossil fuel pipelines to create these delivery systems. And that's such a creative reimagination of existing infrastructure that we already have. What gave you that conviction to see this old pipeline as part of a solution to water equity?
Well, the company actually went on that path before I took over the board, right? And so it was adversity where the political world wanted to stop any new water projects. I mean, they weren't just ours. They stopped any desalination projects. The environmental group said, when I was in government, we were pushing desal. I remember them sitting across the table saying, if you could stick a straw in the ocean, it would fuel unlimited growth. So they, as a policy basis, wanted to stop technology, like desalination technology, from proliferating because it would make too much water supply available, and they wanted to curtail it, right? So they were using those arguments against our project, and they would attack any permit to build a new pipeline. And the company got tied up for years in litigation because they would go and file litigation, not let them build any new pipelines, right? And so that it turns out that Cadiz sits at this place in the desert where steam engines used to stop and fill up water at Cadiz, right? And it was a location where we had 2 rail lines came through Cadiz, and the whole Southwest gas network crosses our property. So we've got all these major Southwest gas lines across our property. Well, some of those lines were put out of service years ago. And so we have empty pipelines that cross our property at Cadiz. And so it was a no-brainer for the company to look at that and say, well, okay, let's not build a new pipeline in the desert. Let's use some of these old pipelines. And, it's not the perfect size. You would normally want to build something bigger to move water, but it's big enough to be able to move some of it. And so it's just a steel pipe. You just have to fix the sections that might need to be built up a little bit more. Then you put in the pumping stations. And so it was very smart, but it was because of adversity, that opposition that wouldn't allow them to put in any new pipelines, that they were really smart about it.
Well, these water projects require technical innovation as well as public trust in some of that innovation. So how do you balance those two when you're rolling something out new?
I think we're at a place with water where technology is critical. I mean, the water infrastructure that we've built around the world is based upon the design that, Romans and the Chinese and the Egyptians, the Roman aqueducts, what we're relying on today, are designed with the same functionality, right? Mm-hmm. And everything has changed. 50 to 60% of our water is lost to evaporation because of climate change and because open air reservoirs and open air canals traveling hundreds of miles, right? And so we're losing half of our water resources to evaporation with a changing climate. The other issue is that water was so taken for granted. In the 1950s in particular, there was a tremendous amount of industrial pollution, right? I think we were very careless before the environmental movement really cracked down on a lot of industrial pollution. And so big, huge groundwater basins in parts of Southern California are contaminated with industrial pollutants from the 1950s. But we had so much water supply that they would just move their wells away from the contamination and just drill new wells, right? But as the population grew and as water supply became more threatened and the groundwater became a lot more threatened, now they can't just move their wells. So now we have to clean up the water. And that's a technology question. And so one of the deals that I'm getting ready to go sign with a bunch of folks down in the Inland Empire in California is we bought a treatment company, the ATEC Filtration Systems, that treats iron, manganese, arsenic, nitrates, forever chemicals. We can treat almost anything. And I'm about to sign a deal where we're going to go in and clean up perchlorate that's in the groundwater basin of a major population area that they have not been able to use their groundwater basin because of a perchlorate plume. And it's been stuck for decades. It's a Superfund site. It's like an old Superfund site. And the groundwater for these major low-income areas is threatening the groundwater for these population areas. We're going to go in and for free put in the treatment because we can. And that will open up the groundwater basin that we can then integrate and use. We can store our water supply in their groundwater basin and integrate all these groundwater networks, right? So technology is a critical part of the go forward on water because you're going to have to treat 100 years of industrial pollutants. I mean, we're just capturing stormwater today. You can't just take stormwater and stick it in groundwater basin because stormwater captures everything on the surface from the roads and the dirt and the debris. That has to all be cleaned up in order to make that water usable for human consumption. So the technology to be able to capture, harness, move, store, and treat water, it's $1 trillion investment. It's $1 trillion industry. And the better we get at technology, the more we're going to be able to make that water available to communities that don't have access today.
It's amazing because I just got back from a vacation in South America. And at least in this country, for me, I take drinking water for granted because you can just get it out of a faucet or in almost any public area. And that's not the case everywhere. And you forget that. Right?
Yeah.
About how that water might not be potable
There's millions of people in very wealthy communities like California, millions, don't have access to clean drinking water. One of the first groups that we worked with was a tribe near the Salton Sea called the Torres Martinez tribe, one of the poorest tribes in the country. And their land was taken away, and what they were given back has very little. Half of it's under the Salton Sea, which is a toxic cesspool. It's not a working sea anymore. And their water has very high levels of arsenic in it. And they have a lot of health problems because of it. Billions of dollars in state funding to clean up water in poor communities. It is criminal that their wells still have arsenic in it. So I cut a deal with them and I put it in for free. I spent a few $1 million putting in water treatment to get the arsenic out of their system just to prove that you could do it for pretty cheap. Mm-hmm. And we did it, right? But it was like right here in our backyard. People don't have access. And now we know a lot more about what it means to have arsenic in your water or forever chemicals, right? Or plastics. Right?
Microplastics. Yeah.
Microplastics. You know, we're so used to drinking water from the tap or drinking bottled water, taking it for granted, that we now have the technology to know exactly what's going into our drinking water.
Yeah. What are you excited about upcoming technologies when you're looking ahead that are going to make clean water even more reliable and accessible?
Yeah, I think it's what we're doing on the treatment side. I mean, yeah. I think when we bought that company for $2 million 3.5 years ago, it's already throwing $18 million, like $4 or $5 million in EBITDA, right, within a year or two. But our ability to scale this is, I think it's the future of my company, is treatment. And people don't think of Cadiz that way, but, you know, the new world, and I think treatment is the future of water supply around the world. And if I can make it more cost effectively than anybody else, and I can still make a nice profit, but I can make it available to poor communities because I can.
Yeah.
And I'm choosing to serve that market. I mean, the guys that are in the treatment world, they're the big guys, and they serve the big water agencies that spend tens of millions of dollars because that's where the big checks come from, right? They're not nimble enough, and there's no money in serving poor communities. We have a technology that is the capital costs and the operating costs are a fraction of what the big guys are. And we can scale down and still make a gross margin in the 30-40%, really nice gross margin. So a decision that we made as a company is we're going to go serve this market, these poor communities. There's a ton of grant money. We'll go get the grant money for you. You know, it's like, we'll help you pay for it. And it's really exciting to marry the mission of the company, the mission of us as people, that we're going to make this available, even though we could be like the big guys and only serve the big markets. We're going to make this a priority and serve this market.
I love that. It's really bringing purposeful profit right to the forefront in such a great way. All right. So one last big question before we go to our lightning round. When you think about now your career, can you think about one of your most surprising or transformative learning moments as a leader, whether it be energy, tech, or water?
I think the biggest transformative moment for me was when my old company, Advanced Microgrid Solution, I was raising my C round and we were going to fail. I couldn't raise the round. I was having trouble. And I cashed in my pension fund. And I used that to anchor the round, because I was clearly facing a situation where if I didn't believe in it enough to put my own money in, I wasn't going to be able to close the round and save the company. And so I cashed in my pension fund. And yeah, it cost me $1 million. I'm still in debt because I didn't have the money to pay for it. I had to borrow the money to pay the taxes on cashing in my pension fund. But it saved the company. And, you know, I don't remember waking up in the middle of the night thinking I'm going to cash in my pension fund. But it was scary. I just threatened my entire future making that decision. And it was that, you know, don't be greedy voice that came in my head, and I did it. But that was transformative because I had to walk the talk. I had to be fearless. I had to walk through the worst fear you can have, which is either the company's going to fail or I'm losing my entire pension fund at 55, right? I'm going to lose my pension fund or am I going to fail the company? And I did it. And I made the right decision.
That's a lot of conviction. That's all three of your statements. Like, be honest, do your best.
Yeah. The only people who made money on that company were the people who bought the software and the guys who financed the debt. Everybody else lost their shirts, including me, right? I would still do it again tomorrow. It's an amazing software platform, an amazing thing. But I had to wake up and realize I failed as an investor, right? It was a bad investment, like a lot of startups fail. The software was really successful, and the company who bought it went public and made a lot of money off of the software that we developed, right? But it was a failed investment from my perspective. I had to wake up and say, life goes on. I'm okay. I'm not a failure because I had a failure. And Arnold Schwarzenegger really taught me this. He used to tell this story over and over again. He said, I didn't know I could lift 500 pounds. I tried 50 times. I tried 75 times. I tried 99 times, and I failed and I failed and I failed. And finally, on the 100th time, I lifted 500 pounds. He said, did I fail 99 times? No, I broke the world record. So the concept of failure, he instilled in me that failure is when you stop trying. And I made it through some very, very expensive failures and mistakes. But I got up the next day. It didn't stop my career. I just said, okay, I learned from that and I'm going to do this differently. And it's like, you learn to incorporate failure as just a good thing. If you're not failing, you're not pushing the envelope. If you're doing something that's never been done before, then failure is part of the learning process. So if you incorporate that notion that failure is just part of the learning process when you're trying to do something really big, it's not scary anymore.
Yeah, I love that. I can see, I'm like having a picture of you standing on a mountain looking out into the frontier.
Well, I'll tell you the time when you wake up and you say, okay, that didn't work, but I'm okay. I'm still here,
Yes.
Sun still came up. All right, so now what do I do today?
All right, so here's one of my favorite parts, the lightning round. What's the first answer that comes to your mind? A book that you would recommend?
Oh, God, there's 3 now. My favorite book in the world, it has to be 3. Sorry, it's not a lightning round. There's Last of the Fathers. It's a biographical on James Madison, one of the founding fathers, about writing the Constitution and what he meant when he wrote it. It was really, really important. Second one is Liz Cheney's book, Truth and Honor.
Oath and Honor.
I can't remember the title, but look at Liz Cheney's book. Really incredible. And the one I just read is Burn Book by Kara Swisher. It's phenomenal about the tech industry.
I just heard about that. Somebody sent that to me and said I should read the book.
Yeah, you got to read it. Kara Swisher's book, Burn Book. Got to read it. It's so important to understand that today.
What's a favorite quote?
My favorite quote is my own quote. It's like, be honest, do your best, don't be greedy. I got a lot of favorite quotes, but that's the one to live by.
Yeah. And what's a habit you live by?
I have a weird habit. Every time I travel, I get $100 bills at the ATM machine, and I find some waiter or a Uber driver or a hotel to leave a $100 bill.
Oh, that's a great habit.
And it's like, don't come home with those in your pocket. Yeah, I have to make sure that I find someone to give it to. I've had waitresses chase me down the terminal and cry. It makes a difference. $100 can make such a difference in somebody's life that moment. It's just an amazing feeling.
I love that. And what gives you hope about the future in water and sustainability?
I think a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And we have sort of disasters that we made it through a disaster on water, a couple of them. And so it has led to major change. You have a disaster like Katrina. When Katrina destroyed the levees in New Orleans, I was in office then with Schwarzenegger, and we actually spent $4 billion fixing our levees in California as a result of that before they failed. He declared an emergency. He went and got the money, and we learned from Katrina. And if we hadn't done that, thousands of people would have lost their lives. It's the disaster that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, I have hope that we've learned from the last few disasters. We were finding dead bodies at Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the U.S. Communities ran out of water. They had no water to put out fires. I mean, people learned from that, and it changed behavior. And so I see that change in behavior today, and it gives me hope that we're actually going to be able to make a difference on water.
Now, finally, where can listeners learn more about you, your work at Cadiz?
The website that Sustaina did such a phenomenal job telling our story. Go to the Cadiz website. It's cadizinc.com. You'll find a lot of video tutorials on the work we're doing, the community work we're doing, video tours, helicopter tours of our projects and stuff. And it's a great story. Go to the website.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much. I love hearing your story. I love hearing your story the first time. I love hearing it again. It does not get old. In fact, it's very exciting to hear some of the things that you're working on today.
Well, I'm really lucky. I'm in the right place where I've been given an opportunity to really do things that will have a life-changing impact. So, you don't pass those up.
That's right. Well, thanks again. Congratulations on all your success so far.
I look forward to continuing our work together.
Yeah, likewise. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to Doing Good by Doing Better. I'm Margaret Rogers, CEO of Pariveda, and I hope this conversation offered you a new way to take your ideas to impact. Follow on Apple or Spotify and join us every other week as we keep learning how to do good by doing better.